I inked one thing that Gene Colan had drawn, and Bob Smith had warned me about this. I knew it really, and Gene and I talked years later about this, and he said his favorite inkers were Bob and Tom Palmer. Bob said, with Gene, you've got 3 lines there, and you have to choose one of them." And I found out that was true, and I think often I chose the wrong one.
Hey, I'm Alex Morrissey. Welcome to Tradecraft. Each episode, I discuss the creative life and process with the people responsible for the books and comics we love. Today's guest is blessed with copious amounts of great talent and passion. When fans discuss a supergroup of comic book lettering titans, John Workman is always on stage. John's been in the comic business for nearly as long as I've been alive, and apologies, buddy, but you'd never know that in talking with him. His undiminished enthusiasm for his passions and crystalline memory pour out in sharp, clear stories like the singular letter forms he's known for. John was heavy metal's art director during their 70s heydays. There, he established a lifelong personal and professional relationship with Walt Simonson when they partnered on the black and white visuals for their adaptation of Alien the movie with Archie Goodwin. He put letters to the Asgardians on their immortal run and still keeps a stash of special tools for Walter's current projects like Ragnarok. A Pacific Northwest native, John eventually migrated to New York City to make it in comics. Following his time at Heavy Metal, he did a stint with DC and then went freelance as an in-demand letterer on books like the aforementioned Thor, Fantastic Four, Jim Starlin and Mike Mignola's Cosmic Odyssey, and Doom Patrol. Another frequent collaborator, Tommy Lee Edwards, encouraged me to get John on the podcast. So when I said it was a go, Tommy wrote, "Get ready for a marathon," and then laughed. John's a great lover of books and film, to which he applies his encyclopedic memory to both subjects. I'd call him a polymath fan. Whether it's on the board or hand-drawing digital lettering, John's still the best at what he does, and what he does is very nice. So I'm excited to share this conversation with you. This is me with John Workman.
This may sound a little silly, but whenever I read comics, especially in the 1960s, I read them as if I were watching a TV show or a movie. And a lot of the Stan Lee written stuff really played out well. Other things didn't. The dialogue sometimes was stilted, and the progression from panel to panel didn't really work when you're thinking in terms of movies or TV. Now, I read a lot of plays around that time. I went through all the Burns Mantle stuff from 1920 up to 1968. I think it was. And I learned a lot from just reading the scripts. And also, Dudley Nichols had done a book back in the 1930s called 20 Best Film Plays, including his own for Stagecoach and maybe a couple of other things. But it had Mr. Smith Goes to Washington in there, and Mrs. Miniver, a lot of great stuff. And it taught me a lot about writing in comics because, you're setting up the stage there, the way panels are set up. But comics, to me, gave you visually a lot more possibilities than play. Plays were based on words, which are wonderful.
Yeah.
But it was interesting to see how sometimes they would have a transition from one scene to another in a play. And sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. You had to kind of use your imagination. My all-time favorite play is Our Town.
Okay.
And of course, they really require you to use your imagination there as far as the background.
Right. I was really fascinated with set design growing up, and and still am to this day, because I just think there is such a great um, level of interpretation, like in the sense of design, like you are giving just enough information often for a stage show to let the viewers understand what this is with context, but not have to really build it all out because there's no budget for this, there's no space for it. And like you said, if you're switching scenes, well, it's real tough to, go, okay, we're taking all the stuff off the stage in one fly and putting a whole new thing in here. It doesn't really work for most options.
I felt sorry for Orson Welles. He had a great imagination. He was a good artist too.
Hmm.
I was really surprised at that. But there was one play that he did on Broadway back in the 30s. He was very young, of course, but he had a rotating part of the stage, and it didn't quite work correctly. And he was actually, as it rotated, people were being tossed off of parts of it out into the audience, and it would have been hilarious to have filmed that. I'd like to really see what happened.
That would
I was
be
reading it.
a
Yeah.
zealous Susan, not a lazy Susan.
Yeah. A good old Orson.
Yeah. Well, there you touch on that, and I think that's a very strong indicator, and not to be downplaying other tasks, because I think we both can agree the written word is so powerful, but so many great modern artists, and when I say artists, I mean filmmakers and all these people have other skill sets. They do have great hand skills. Like they can do a drawing, they can capture something, in a two-dimensional space to bring you into what their vision is quickly. And you think of Ridley Scott, who is actually really great draftsperson, and oh, what's his name? Terminator. You know, that guy.
Oh,
Everyone's yelling.
yeah,
Everyone's yelling at me right now. Um,
me too.
yeah,
I
but
can't remember
I
his
mean,
name.
but these guys can draw, and I think that's part of their natural gift, is to be able to translate their sort of inspiration into some sort of visual medium, and then clearly communicate beyond themselves to get other people to make this visual thing happen. James Cameron. Okay, I haven't lost
Yeah.
my mind entirely. Um, but that's like, I think
Well,
it's a tough thing. I mean, as an art director, I mean, this is a very hard task to do. It may not seem hard to the people who are good at it, but for people who have never done it, it's a daunting effort.
that was a lot of fun at Heavy Metal. I loved putting together the covers. I wanted to have the artwork dominate as much as possible, but we needed the logo up there and other things, of course. And I really worked hard to make what had to be there, but to not take away from the art on it. I did disagree with our publisher at one point. The first few issues of Heavy Metal, oh, there was a Mobius monster on one of them. Bernie Wrightson, I think, did a dragon or something like that on a mountain. And then, long about the middle of the second year, suddenly semi-clothed females started popping up on those covers, which I didn't mind, but I thought, that gets old awfully fast. But our publisher laid down the law that we had to have a really a pretty female on each cover. And I remember one that I really liked. I think Julie Simmons actually brought this one in. Can't remember the artist now, but it was an extreme close up of a man's face, but where his eyes were, there were bars. And there was a, a, a young girl, well, 20, 21, whatever. She was swinging out from behind those bars. She had just managed to break them on one of his eyes and was coming out of his head.
Hmm.
And it was such a neat thing. And there was a sort of a sense of humor about it. We did use a cover that was once intended to be on Lampoon, but they thought it didn't quite work there. It was by one of the French artists, and it was uh, a woman's body from about her chin down to mid upper leg, and in a sort of a space outfit.
Hmm.
but very like almost if it had been painted on her. It was something that Wally Wood might have done.
Hmm.
Well, did do years ago. There was a great cover on Weird Fantasy number 27 that he did. In the foreground is this beautiful woman in a gold spacesuit, and a couple of guys in the background being chomped up by this monstrous creature. One of them firing a ray gun at it. Um, I didn't mind that too much. It was a blatant sort of sexy thing
Sure.
there. I thought that was maybe a little bit too much, and if it was too much for a lampoon, I kind of wondered that. But it did the job. There were a couple of things with heavy metal that I didn't understand. There was one issue where sales dropped by 20,000, and we went through it. We couldn't figure out what had happened, and I was talking to Mike Hinge, the artist. He he was always over at Neil Adams' studio, but he came up to visit one day, and we were talking, and I told him about how perplexed I was about that issue, and he said, "Well, if you look at it, you've got this long story in there, and people either liked it or didn't, and there were enough that didn't like that story to throw your sales off." And I looked at it again. It was beautiful. It
Yeah.
was a French reprint. I think it was done in watercolors, and it was gorgeous artwork. And I said, "But we all liked it." And he said, "Yeah, I like it too," Mike said, "but a lot of people didn't. So that explains the drop in sales." And then there was another issue where sales went up by 20,000.
Hmm.
And it had a nice Bernie Wrightson cover on the background or on the back of the book. We always had a front and back cover. Um, and I thought, well, that's not going to make the difference. But inside we had a multi-page article on the characters of Edgar Rice Burroughs,
Mm.
and Clyde Caldwell had done all these nice illustrations of Tarzan and John Carter and various other people, and that was it. That was the reason it went up in sales by 20,000.
So you sort of got the I guess the genre science fiction reader boost who are fans of Edgar Rice Burroughs go, well,
Yeah,
I need to know more about this.
somehow the word got around on that one, and the Burroughs people picked up extra copies of it,
Yeah. Anything with
which was
Tarzan was like candy to me as a kid. I would like, we get you just any, I don't know what it was, but there's just something about it swinging around trees with apes, and that was a pretty cool thing for a stupid kid.
the first physical comic that I actually owned. Well, no, I'm wrong. Uh, in 1956 or so, my parents bought me a Superman costume. And along with that costume came a little half-size book. It's reproduced in the DC vault. Um, but it was Superman and these two kids all wearing costumes, a Superman costume. But he's telling them that just because they have a costume doesn't mean they should go jumping off the roof. And I'd kind of figured that out myself, but it was interesting. It was I must have seen or been aware of comic books,
Uh-huh.
but I don't really remember any before that one. But the ones I first owned, there were two that my parents bought for me and my brother to read and read and read and read on the way the trip out to Washington that we took from Maryland to Washington, looking for a you know better job for my dad and a new life out there. One of them, one was a Bugs Bunny, some sort of Dell
Mm-hmm.
Warner Brothers cartoon thing. The other one was a Tarzan book with Gordon Scott on the cover as Tarzan. He was the Tarzan in the films at that time. And I remember he was standing there looking sort of majestic, and he had just thrown his knife into the base of a tree for some reason. And a few years went by, that comic disappeared as they tend to do. And one day I was at a used bookstore looking through there, going through the comics there for 5 cents each, and there was Gordon Scott with the knife. So I had it again. I
Nice.
still do.
I've talked about it before, but I don't think I was aware of comic books until my father came home, like with 3 comic books, and just gave me 3 comics. And I have no idea what prompted it. I mean, I know that the Super Friends existed. I liked the cartoon. This is very, very early 70s, maybe 70. 91-ish kind of time. And I liked that, and I think somehow in this sort of equation of time, and it's obviously blurry as a child, but it's either the comic books came first or like Amigo superhero, Batman figure came in first. One of those two, but I still have all three. I mean, they're in horrible shape. They're just, beat to snot, but they are weird heirlooms to keep on.
Kathy and I were talking the other night. I've been assimilating my brother's collection. He died a couple of years ago, and he collected comics. He was a big sports fan, which I'm not really. But I came across two copies of the Lois Lane Annual #2 from 1960 something, and one of them was Kathy's. We met because of Kurt Schaffenberger, the artist.
Mhm.
She came into the bookstore that I was working in out in Washington, looking for old issues of Lois Lane drawn by Kurt. She disliked the new art that had started after Carmine became art director. He took Kurt off the book and put an artist whose name escapes me now, Irv Novick, I think it was Irv Novick in place of Kurt. And Kathy wasn't fond of Irv Novick's art, so she was looking for these old issues. And we started talking about comics and then about books and movies. And next thing you know, we're going on dates, and it's all because of Carmine and Kurt.
Wow. Nice. That's a great thing to add to Carmine's legacy for sure. Uh-huh. So I want to go back to, I guess, maybe heavy metal a little bit here, because those are kind of like, I guess, for a certain generation, very heady time of heavy metal. Like that was they established kind of an institutional um, standard for this really amazing European artwork, American artwork, what would be considered adult comic books, not in a an lurid sense, but in a sense of subject matter. And
Mhm.
I remember, you remember them in the wild, when you were a kid in the 70s, you couldn't go and buy heavy metal because it would, I'm sure they wouldn't have sold them to us because we were obviously too young. But they, but when you saw them, you're like, this is so much bigger, so much more than what, the regular comic books that I was reading at the time felt like. Like what, I mean, the answer could be just paycheck, but what did the subject of what they were doing draw you to heavy metal, or was it a matter of other reasons?
Well, I had been aware of Mobius and Philippe Drouillet and some of the others several years before. I don't know if people have a real memory for this, but Philippe first popped up in the Warren books, but not as one of the artists on the comics. He was in the letter column. He had sent a bunch of samples, I guess, to Jim Warren, and Warren felt that they were interesting enough to print. So that's where I discovered him. Mobius, I knew of from his Gere days when he was doing Lieutenant Blueberry, and then when transformed into Mobius, it was just amazing to me. I was trying though at the time to do some stuff for Lampoon. Joe Orlando, who had done things for Lampoon for years, on and off, even when he was working for DC, um, I showed him something that I'd come up with, and it was meant to replace the Jeff Jones strip that had been in Lampoon. Evidently, Jeff and Matty Simmons had a bit of a disagreement, and suddenly Jeff wasn't doing it anymore. So I thought, well, I'll try to do a one page or something like that, and I came up with this little 9-inch tall female sprite from another dimension who loved old movies, and she would come into our dimension and sit and watch movies on television alongside this Siamese cat who was wild over the Andrews sisters, the singers from the 1950s. And I used it. I only did a couple of them, but I used it to uh, have my revenge on some people that I thought had done some terrible things to movies. NBC, for instance, ran a movie called Red Sky at Morning. I had seen it at the theater. I expected something terrible. Desi Arnaz Jr.
Mm.
was one of the principals in it, and I
Okay.
thought, but it was incredibly good. It was set in the 1940s. Just I can't say enough good stuff about it. They ran it on NBC ran it as one of their movies of the week or something. And I gathered all these people together to see this wonderful movie. And I told them it's going to be censored. There's some minor nudity in it. There's some cussing, but it's not going to hurt the overall story. But when whoever put the thing together for NBC decided that Richard Thomas was starring in the movie and the Waltons had narration in it.
Hmm.
So they would add narration to this movie. And they took every mid-70s cliche you could think of and dropped it into this beautiful movie that was set in the 1940s. And after the movie ended, the people that I gathered together just kind of looked at me like, "You like this movie, huh?" And what they had seen was nothing like what I'd seen at the theater. So I complained about that by way of the little BJ Butterfly character that I had created. Joe really liked the artwork on it. And immediately gave me a story to ink for DC, and it was kind of fun. But I tried to get in contact by way of Joe with Peter Kleinman at Lampoon. He was the art director there, and to show him my artwork and see what I might do. And I kept calling, and he was always out or something. And then one day in the production department, Steve Mitchell answered the phone, handed it to me, and said, "It's for you." And it was Peter Kleinman. And he wanted to see me. So I thought, oh, Joe must have said something nice about me or whatever. And I took my artwork over there, and they thought it was nice, but they didn't say yes or no as far as a Lampoon, but they wanted me to be art director. And it turned out of heavy metal, turned out that Neil Adams had recommended
Mm.
me. And I thought, whoa, yeah. So I accepted very quickly. And I think I had to go back and talk to them later on. And I was mistaken about the date. So I was a day late. But
Wow.
the neat thing, Peter took me in to talk to Matty Simmons, who was the head of the company. And there was a guy sitting there who looked like he just stepped out of 1961. And of course, his name escapes me now, but he was one of the co-writers on Animal House. They
Oh.
just finished the filming on it. And anyway, that's how I got into heavy metal. They gave me a tiny little office, and initially I was just sort of relettering the French stuff. And then as more possibilities popped up, I got into other areas of it. Sean Kelly was the editor at that time. He was a wonderful guy, really talented writer. And also, he did one of the most hilarious stand up routines I've ever seen in my life, just for me. When we moved me into a larger office, we were sitting there and he just went into this thing. It was hilarious. Um, Ted White came along later as editor,
Hmm.
and he was, I think, the best editor heavy metal ever had. He was fantastic. But after a year, he was out, and it was me and Julie Simmons, kind of as co-editors. Although the official line on the credits in the magazines had Lynn Mogul as editor and publisher. The only thing that required all three of us to okay was the covers.
Okay.
And I do remember a beautiful cover by Greg Hildebrandt,
Mm.
and I really, really liked it. It had a unicorn and this nude but not nude girl on the front cover there with some flowers in the foreground. The colors were fantastic. I voted yes on that, and Julie and Lynn voted no. And I kept at them. I bugged them as much as I could, and finally got them to come around to my way of thinking on it. So we ran it as a cover, and that became the best-selling issue of Heavy Metal ever.
Wow.
We also sold initially the first month 14,000 posters uh, of the cover,
Yeah.
without the heavy metal logo and all, and several thousand each month after that, uh, by way of an
Wow.
ad I'd done up for the magazine.
How did the French artwork come to you? I mean, were they sending you over stats of the art and you would have to put new lettering in there and then kind of rework artwork around whatever the new balloon shapes were?
They were sending us, film. I think they
Yeah.
were in the form of negatives, and, we would have positive shot positives of each page shot, and I would slap them down on our, paper there, and, I actually paste in
Mhm.
the new lettering, and, the film people did the work from there. Uh, it was a lot of fun. I tried to not be Mobius or Douillet or whoever I was, or whatever story I was lettering, but to kind of capture their spirit.
Mhm.
And Douillet's stuff was a lot of fun to do. I used a sort of a fake Irish unchel that I developed for a lot of it, and then other things I had to get more ornate. The Mobius stuff is just wonderful. I met Basil Wolverton back in 1968, and we used to go over to his place and talk to him, and he told me that I would eventually get to the point with my lettering where I wouldn't need guidelines.
Mm.
He was I had I've never been able to do that except with the Mobius stuff.
Huh.
He had such a bounce to it
Yeah.
that I just went right at it, and yeah, I loved what he did. He came up to the office. He was in New York one time. He came up there and we had a nice talk, and he spoke English fluently, so I didn't have to worry about trying to comprehend French. I was worried about a couple of things. One was my relettering of his stuff. He said he was perfectly happy with it. And we talked further about lettering. He said that he couldn't understand why American artists didn't do their own lettering.
Mhm.
He said to him it would be like drawing a page and then having somebody else come in and ink all the heads of the character. It wouldn't really be him. And he was right completely.
Mhm.
We talked about Frank Thorne and Alex Toth
Sure.
certainly, and several other people who usually or tried to usually do their own lettering on it. It really made a difference. It was very individualistic that way. There was one thing that I was worried about. I had taken three individual black and white illustrations that Mobius had done and put them together and colored them uh, and created a one-page story. And I thought, maybe he'll punch me out or something about that. But also, I, I've never felt this aura of kindness from. Well, I've come across it with a few people, but
Sure.
he had it in just huge amounts. He was maybe the kindest person I've ever met, the nicest, the
Hmm.
most wonderful. Geez, I can't really explain it.
It makes sense.
He,
You know,
yeah.
I mean, there's so much joy in the Mobius artwork. You know, there's this,
Mhm.
and I would only assume that that's possibly the most true expression and extension of himself. So it kind of seems logical to me.
Well, he had done some stuff that I thought was maybe a bit too much for heavy metal, but it wound up in Lampoon, and there was total nudity in it, and lots of things going on, and you couldn't escape the feeling of innocence
Hmm.
about it. It wasn't anything, it was overt, but it wasn't anything beyond the pale.
Right.
I can't even explain it here, but yeah, the creatures that he did were wonderful. The Arzak stuff,
Hmm.
where Arzak is flying on this sort of happy pterodactyl, I guess you'd call it.
Sure.
Yeah, he had this ability that very few people have. I really think he may be the greatest comic book artist of all time.
It's hard to argue that. I mean, there's a pantheon, of these sort of luminaries that float around in our psyche, and but I look at the diversity. There are very few people who had sort of this breadth of what they could do, um, and a sense of self in that. Like I said, this extension of himself within the Mobius artwork. Um, Toth is always an argument to be made there. His absolute mastery of most everything he touched, but unfortunately, I don't think there's not the breadth of work um, within. He had a very interest, an obvious interest in what he wanted to do, and I totally appreciate that. Um,
I studied Toth stuff.
mhm.
I hated it when I was a kid.
Okay.
I thought, "Oh, geez," and I remember reading an article in a fanzine about the war and stuff, and, here's Wally Wood and Al Williamson and all these, great people, working for Warren initially, and they said the greatest of all was Alex
Right.
Toth. And I thought, "Are these guys nuts?" He shouldn't even be among these other people. And then I read an interview with him, in, Graphic Story magazine, and it was like a light bulb,
Mm,
you know, literally goes off the top of my head. Suddenly I could understand what he was doing,
yeah.
and it was brilliant. And I could see I have a really good friend who still hates Tove. Yeah, he won't even look at this stuff. But I was like, I just learned suddenly what he was trying to do and how successful he was doing with it. But he did have different styles throughout the years. He and Carmine and everybody else in the 40s was trying to be Milton Caniff
Hmm.
or Noel. And then he got away from that, as did Carmine. And probably by the mid 50s with most of those guys, but Toth, I think, made the jump a little earlier to his own sort of style. And then he grew on that. And
Hmm.
he simplified over the years that there's a definite 50s look and a 60s look and a 70s look to him. Uh, he may be, I don't know. One of my favorite stories is that Hot Wheels, the
Oh
one
yeah.
that he wrote into.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a
It
masterpiece.
is.
You can learn more about storytelling and that just by reading it
Hmm.
than you could, reading 100 other comics.
Here's I've just thought about this when you're saying that, but you think about I can think of three artists off the top of my head who are considered some of the greatest to ever be in the industry, and all three of some of their crowning achievements are all toy based. So Hot Wheels, all right. Jose
Uh-huh.
Garcia Lopez,
Oh, yeah.
with his Atari Force, and Michael Golden with you pick either Micronauts or GI Joe. Like you have these guys who everyone's bowing down for their skill sets, which are innumerable, and then you go, but toys. They were able to do something with toys that nobody else would even dream of when it came to making it something
Well,
of great
I know
value
Wally Wood,
back then.
in addition to all the comic stuff he did, he did advertising, of course, and he did things for I guess Mattel. Uh, I can't remember the exact companies, but he did illustrations for puzzles and things
Hmm.
like that. Uh, there was a Sea Hunt game, the old Lloyd Bridges
Sure, yeah.
show that.
The whole Bridges
Uh,
family. If you were a Bridges, you were in Sea Hunt. Both boys. Um, that, but you're but now thinking because a big thing. So Will Eisner was one of my teachers in art school, and Will was like, "Hey, don't forget to think about because everyone's like, I want to draw superheroes," and he's like, "Hey, there's good money to be made in like corporate comics, and everyone's like,
oh
you know,
yeah.
but like." Will probably bought a few houses on the work that he did for the U.S. government
Hmm.
over the decades. I mean, I think he did the M16 manual. Like, he was, these guys they understood the value of the visual storytelling in the terms of communication beyond just an entertainment factor.
When I was 17, I did some stuff for the local Army recruiter. I painted a window. It was around Christmas time, and so I did this mural of some sort with Santa Claus on the window of the small place there that he had, and I noticed all these issues of PS laying around, and I immediately, glommed onto the fact that Eisner was doing the artwork in it, and he gave me a bunch of
Oh,
those.
wow.
So I have some later ones that Joe Kubert was involved with, and other things, but uh, there was a mistake. I don't know if you can call it a mistake. Well, it was something that someone should have caught. One of them had a crashed helicopter on the cover of it, and a Vietnamese fellow was on his knees there, kind of looking at the helicopter, and there were army guys around and all. And the Vietnamese fellow didn't have any shoes on, and I guess in Vietnam, at least at that time, one of the worst insults you could offer another person was to show them the bottom of your
Hmm.
feet. And here, Will had drawn the guy with no shoes on and his feet showing. Uh, Eisner, I came across because of those illegal IW reprints that were done in the 1960s.
Okay.
Isidore Waldman, what was the name of the guy who he somehow got a hold of metal plates, I guess, that had been used
Hmm.
for printing for his comics, and he was doing Plastic Man, the old quality stuff. He did at least one EC science fiction book and two Spirits, I think. I have both of them. I don't think there were more than 2. They were all totally illegal, and
Mhm.
of course, DC and Eisner sent cease and desist orders. But one of the books, I think either Andrew and Esposito or someone who was involved with DC did the cover on it. Didn't really look like the Spirit on the as he was on the inside, but they were all Eisner stories inside, and they were fantastic. It was like the first time I came across some Marvel stuff. To go back a bit, I started actively collecting comics in 1959. I'd seen Disney's Sleeping Beauty, and I was just bowled over by the artwork on that. Ivan Earl's backgrounds with
Mhm.
those squared off trees and such. So I started buying Disney things from Dell, and mostly it was new movies, comics adaptations of these movies as they came out. They were done to promote the movies, and then I never really got into Disney's comics and stories until years later. A friend of mine showed me the Bark stuff and how good it was, and the individual longer comics that Barks did. Uh, but it took me a while. I realized as a kid that when you're a kid, it's like you're in a circle that keeps expanding and expanding
Mhm.
and expanding. And not only from where you live, you go out further and so I started discovering places where I could get old comics for 5 cents each, and big little books from the 1930s for
Mm,
10
yeah, yeah.
cents, things like that. Uh, but I also did that as far as the comics. I went from the Dells. I met a friend, Jack Adams, who I went to school with, and he had a pretty good sized collection of Superman related comics. So I started reading his books, and we would trade off things, and so I started buying all the Superman stuff, and then I went from there to the other DCs. Going from Weisinger to Julie Schwartz was like going to something more sophisticated,
Sure. Sure.
Although Weisinger, we talked about this. He really was great with Superman from 1958 to 63 or so, but and I didn't do much with the Marvels. I had bought a few of the monster stuff,
Yeah.
monster things, earlier 60s, late 50s, and I thought they were okay. Um, but I got sick one time. I was laid up with the flu or something, and my brother went to see what uh, had come in new at the local drugstore, where they had everything, by the
Hmm.
way. Even from the early days, I didn't have to worry about missing anything because this one store, most of the stores in the area there, we're talking about Aberdeen, Washington, back at that time, they had all the comics you'd want.
Wow.
initially, I remember having to go to one store to get Showcase and another store to get the Flash, but after a while, everything was at every store. But he came back from his trip to the drugstore with a bunch of Marvels. I think he had Spider-Man #9 and I don't know how Strange Tales, a few other things. And I said, "Why in the world did you get these?" And I read them, and they were so good.
Yeah.
So I started reading the Marvels, and I was in on X-Men #1 and Daredevil #1.
Wow.
I missed Avengers #1 because I wasn't kind of aware of it then, but I got it used for 5 cents in really good shape, and I bought all the Avengers after that until a time in the early '70s when I went through my whole collection and I sold about 1,000
Yeah.
of the comics that I had. I thought I was doing really well selling Avengers #1 because I'd gotten it for 5 cents and I sold it for
Look
$3.50.
at you.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I kept my first 11 Daredevils and then selected ones after that. And the X-Men, I kept the first dozen or so. And then the Steranko issues I kept
Hmm.
and the Neil Adams, Tom Palmer ones. Tom Palmer was great. What a
I say this all the time. So Gene Colan was another one of my teachers, and he was teaching us how to ink. So Gene Colan, the guy who's the hardest person to ink in comic books, is teaching people how to ink. And what Gene did is he brought in, 11 by 17 copies of his pencils and handed them out to us and said, "Okay, ink these." And like, I mean, you have never seen more poorly inked pages of comic books in the history of comic books than in that class that week.
I inked one thing that Gene Colan had drawn, and Bob Smith had warned me about this. I knew it really, but Bob was really good on Gene Colan over at DC. And Gene and I talked years later about this, and he said his favorite inkers were Bob and oh no, I've forgotten his name. I mentioned him just a minute
Oh,
ago.
Tom Palmer.
Tom
Yeah, yeah.
Palmer. Uh, but Bob said with Gene, you've got 3 lines there, and you have to choose one of them. And I found out that was true, and I think often I chose the wrong
It's
one.
it's like an editing job, like in high speed. Like it is I everybody who ever sat down with that man's artwork, let alone when it's actual pencil artwork, I would have just jumped out the window. I don't think I would have done it.
Well, there was something involving pencils, and this is, I think, a failure on my part, and it's always bothered me. But we had huge success with Alien at Heavy Metal, and that was entirely because of Walt Simonson and Archie Goodwin. Walt brought in Archie, and the two of them cannot be beaten. I mean,
No.
uh, what they did was so good. They took the script as it changed and transformed it into comics. It wasn't just a version or an adaptation of the movie. It was comics. They took the script and instead of filming it, they put it down on paper. And I'm so proud of those guys.
Yeah.
They did a great job. And Archie, I had done a rough version of what I wanted for the cover, the front cover on it. I wanted the word alien to be really huge. And I just put a spaceship flying underneath it. It was supposed to be the Nostromo. It was just something I hacked together because I hadn't seen
Mhm.
in any of the movie at that time. And Archie looked at it, I swear, in 2 seconds, he said, "How about if we drop some tentacles down from the word alien
Mhm.
and had them encapsulate the spaceship?" And it was such a brilliant idea. It told the story,
Mhm.
right there on the cover. And the people at 20th Century Fox were angry at us because Archie and Walt had done a better job with explaining the thing with one picture
Yeah.
than they had done their poster for the movie.
Their
But
tagline was the best part of marketing for them, which was
oh yeah,
in space nobody can hear you scream. Like that was
mhm.
that did, on a literary side, they nailed it there for sure.
Yep, that was perfect.
Yeah. Yeah, that's yeah, I mean, listen, we anybody could wax on poetically about Archie and his endless amounts of skills and personality. The guy really was kind of the heart of comic books for many, many decades. And there are plenty of people who owe their livelihoods and careers to that man's generosity and acumen. Love the guy.
I didn't know it at the time, but my method of creating comics when I was a teenager, and it continues to this day, is to draw them out.
Mm,
I
yeah.
sometimes it was as simple as stick people, and other times it was more involved than that. But I would put in the words, and those were changeable. I would actually letter them first onto the final artboard, so I had all that taken care of, and leave the balloon out, put that in later when I had the artwork done. But it I didn't know it, but it was the way that Al Celestine and Harvey Kurtzman
Hmm.
and Archie Goodwin worked, and it was the way that all the Archie writers worked. I didn't know that until years later when I was working for Archie. They didn't send me a script. They sent me these drawn out pages.
Hmm.
Sometimes they were as simple as stick men, with an arrow pointing to saying, "This is Archie, this is Jughead." But it was all worked out visually first, and then the artist could take it, and if he had, a different idea in mind, for a certain panel, he could do that, or he or she, and it's just a great way to work. But I had no idea that these heroes of mine,
Hmm.
were doing the same sort of thing.
I've observed this the phenomenon, and it's interesting to me that the predominant number of artists who move into writing, or they're writing their own thing, they will do the same way. I mean, they're physically storyboarding out their story
Mhm.
as they generate it through in their head, and it's a real fascinating process. The hardest part is when they start collaborating and they need to express a story to somebody else. And you would think, in terms of like Keith Giffen, who actually just sat with a marker and kind of drew out his 6 panel, grid every issue. And having drawn comics with Keith, his like, hey, listen, here's my idea. You don't have to do anything that I drew here, but this is the story. And you would just then kind of do your thing. And it's a great experience because it's different than drawing from a DC script, which is pretty,
Mhm.
you know, prescriptive, and or a Marvel script, which is relatively, you know, it's a suggestion. Like here's what's going to happen, and you kind of do the whole thing. So I it's an interesting hybrid, and I don't know off the top of my head anybody currently writing comics that fashion for other people to draw. I'm not saying that there aren't people. I'm not aware of anyone doing that, and I would be excited to hear somebody doing that because I mean it's a fun way to tell a story. It's very it's very personal sitting there with that little thumbnail kind of size drawing and kind of
Uh-huh.
moving these little shapes around to get that story the way you want it to kind of work.
To me, it's always been liberating to
Yeah.
work that way. I did it at Heavy Metal on 2 pages of the June 2050 series that I had created. Uh, I did it for George Pratt and Kent Williams. And I wrote out the story. I lettered it on the boards, had broken it down into panels, although even there they could, make some changes that they wanted to. Bernie Krigstein was really noted for that. He would take an EC page. They were lettered, all ready to go. He just had to add the balloons and the tail when he decided exactly what he wanted to draw there. But he would take 3 panels and turn them into six
Hmm.
or 8 or 9 or something like that. Um, I told George and Kent that they had the ability to do that if they wanted to. They didn't, um, and they stuck pretty close to what I had really roughed out for them. I told them, ignore this if you want. If you want to do it from a different angle or something, you have total freedom as far as the visuals on this, as long as they go with the story and uh, it's been set up for you, but you can take it from here. And both of them said that they felt like it encroached on their territory.
Hmm. Yeah.
And I always thought of it as liberating.
Hmm.
So I don't know, maybe it depends on the person. A lot of the people, when no, when Harvey Kurtzman did that at EC, felt as if they were, he was getting into their territory. But he was an
Well,
artist
yeah,
too.
I think you're talking on it and around it, is that this is the spontaneity of the storytelling, the visual storytelling aspect of comic books is that thumbnailing process. So if I guess
Mm.
maybe if somebody takes that away from you without sort of just kind of disregarding what they've done entirely, you don't have that sort of that initial spark to go, all right, how's this gonna come out? And yeah, that's interesting. I work with a an artist, or a writer and an artist, and as an editor at times. And when he's just kind of putting stuff down, and he'll just kind of cut and paste like things, and he hasn't really figured out his storytelling, I will draw, the panels and just kind of put together like, here's how I could think you could move the eye around. And he's like,
Uh-huh.
yay, he's thrilled by this because then he can kind of like take that and go somewhere with it. But I don't think I mean, listen, nobody answers the same problem the same way. So some people want to have a springboard to jump off of. Some people want to climb up higher in the tree and, leap out there into the space.
Well, just after Warren went bankrupt and was taken over by Harris, I lettered an 8-page story written for Harris. I don't know, Creepy or Eerie, one of the books by Alan Moore, and it was an 8-page story, but the script was 25 pages long. Uh, he described everything in the panel
Wow.
beautifully, and told you what had to go there, and the actions and all that. And every time at the end of his big description of it, he would say, "But if you have a better idea, run with it."
Nice.
But after you read that description,
There's nothing
it was in,
left.
there was no way.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like reading a book, and then at the end the author writes like, but if you've got a better idea for this, how this story goes, write it yourself. Like it's just not going to work that way. It's brilliant and insidious all at the same time. But who would expect anything different from Alan Moore? Um, there's an interesting, there's so many different things I want to ask you, but there's this interesting kind of period in comic books from the late 70s and into the 80s where the that independent, that sort of prestige independent comic book and publication kind of came into play. That was that bridging gap between the sort of the independent black and whites that spot around in stores, and Marvel and DC. And then you started getting the Eclipse comics, the First comics, all these sort of early publications. I mean, were you excited by that kind of movement, because you worked with a lot of those titles and publishers, and I'm just curious if that was like an exciting area for you to kind of enter.
It was Star Reach was the first one that I ever really worked for. I did send some things to some of the undergrounds. But by the time I got to them, they were starting to kind of head downhill. But they excited me. I was working at a bookstore, and the friend of mine, Dave Eaton, who had opened the bookstore, he was a big comics fan, and he was hoping that someone would clean out their attic and bring him comics from the 1940s, or that he could buy for 3 cents or something like that, and put in his collection. It never really happened. He did get a complete collection of Esquires from the beginning up until the early 50s, and Life magazine, and Playboy, I think, other things like that he was happy with, but um, nothing real old as far as comics came into the store. Yeah, he started getting in new comics in addition to the old ones we had. So we sold them. We made a deal with the distributors, the local distributor, to not return. certain comics. We returned all the Archies and Richie Rich and things like that, but we kept 99% of the Marvels and DCs and put them into our back issue
Mm-hmm.
grouping there. Uh, but in addition to those, Dave got all kinds of undergrounds. There was an underground distributor out of Seattle, a very nice fellow, Dave Tatelman was his name. And he founded the Seattle Simpleton later on that both Bob Smith and I worked for, and Sherry Flanagan and Bobby London and all kinds of other people. But the undergrounds were really an eye opener to me. The first one I actually saw wasn't at Dave's store, though. I worked at a supermarket for a while, and I was hitting home one night, and there on the corner of the parking lot was a Zap #1.
No.
Yeah. And someone had probably driven up from California who picked up Zap #1 along the way, read it, and tossed it out of their car. So I picked it up and took it home with me. And it was an eye opener.
Yeah.
It amazed me what could be done with comics. I knew that comics had a potential.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that killed me as a kid, I love the comics form, and as I said, I realized there's so much potential there. But when I thought every night people come home from work, they sit down and they watch Gilligan's Island and all these other things that I liked generally, but that I realized were just brain candy.
Mm-hmm.
And here are most comics probably fall into that, even now, probably fall into that same category. But there were comics that were so brilliant compared to what millions of people were watching on television. And they might sell at that time, 300,000 or something.
Mm-hmm.
The number of people who were actually reading them as opposed to what or record albums. A record album could come out and sell 1 million copies or
Sure.
so. And, maybe it was brilliant, maybe it wasn't. I still think the Beatles were brilliant at their best, but the comics had such potential. But they'd gotten a black eye back in the 1950s,
Mm-hmm.
thanks to Rick Wortham. And there was still, when people saw that I read comics, oh, they're terrible, aren't they? And
Right.
one guy told me about how Superman kills people and all. And he was just, the great unwashed didn't understand what they could be doing instead of watching Gilligan's Island. Uh, but the comics, the underground comics, took a step further, and I thought, wow. And then when Star Reach came along, and it was kind of a bit of undergrounds, a bit of the regular DC and Marvel
Mm-hmm.
stuff, the better
Yeah.
DC and Marvel. And ever since I'd read that interview with Tove, he kind of said, I don't know about that. But when they talked about the potential for graphic novels, I thought, yeah, I want to have something to do with that.
Mm-hmm.
And Alien, I mean, I guess you could call it a graphic
Yeah.
novel. To me, I contributed something there. Yeah, I later found out from Archie that when uh, for Archie Goodwin, uh, that when Marvel started doing their graphic novels, they based the format on Alien.
Hmm.
They measured it and everything, and went for what I'd already set up. Um,
Wow. I didn't know that. That's awesome.
there's still huge potential in comics, and they've made great strides over the years. I mean, look at Watchmen
Oh yeah.
and
Yeah. I mean,
V for Vendetta.
I'm looking at Stray Bullets right now. I mean, how great was that? And I'm such a I'm such a geek for Paul Pope's Battling Boy that he did, like, I don't know,
Uh,
20 years ago, I don't know, 15 years ago. But like I look at this and I'm like, it's such a great story. Like if I was a kid and that book was in my hand, I would have carried it with me everywhere. It's just, I think as a form, listen, I spend hours every day of my life writing novels. I spend hours every day reading books and
mm,
comics. And I uh I know the connection between a human holding an object and leafing through an object and engaging with this thing with their mind and their eyes and their hands and their heart makes a connection that's very hard to beat. Music might be the only thing that is a more uh, connected thing because it gets right into us with very little effort. Um, but it's something that like if when comics are done right, it is it's as great as a David Lean film. It's unbelievable.
Well, the potential. When I was a teenager, and I realized this, I did two things. There were people who were saying, "Why in the world are you're 16 years old? Why are you reading those things?" And along with the Batman TV series in 1966, which was hardly adult or hardly the
Hmm.
best use of comics, but um, it came an awareness thanks to articles in Newsweek and lots of newspapers that old comics were worth something monetarily. And I lied through my teeth to people about how, oh yeah, I'm collecting them because they're going to be worth something. And they were, but I didn't give a hoot about what the value of them was. I was buying these because I really loved the form, and uh, I realized that superheroes. Well, my favorite superhero was Captain Marvel, the
Yeah.
original Fawcett one. I managed to get about a third of all those over the years. Superman and Batman, I really liked. Spider-Man was wonderful. Spider-Man, though, is a great example of how in superheroes you walk a thin line. Uh, if you cross that line into too much reality, the whole thing becomes ludicrous.
Hmm.
Stan Lee and Steve Ditko and Stan Lee and John Romita knew exactly how to not cross that line. They took you as much into reality as they could. And it was wonderful, those stories that those guys did. And there were other people too that did the same thing, sort of thing. Others lapsed into, especially over the last 40 years, they've lapsed a bit too much into reality,
Hmm.
and it becomes kind of ludicrous. Howie Chaykin and I were talking one time. I really enjoy talking to him. He's great. But
Same.
I told him that I thought the only thing that well, one of the few things, let's put it that way, that matches superhero comics in other media is grand opera. Here
Okay.
you have these people, i- they might as well be wearing superhero
Sure.
outfits, and they're bursting into song, doing all these very unreal
Hmm.
things, and yet it works within that
Yeah.
format. And Howie got this incredulous look on his face and said, "Yeah, he totally agreed on that."
You're right. Like think about like also other forms like, and I'm very little relationship to it, but like professional wrestling. It's very much,
Oh yeah,
it's very much in line. And I would even go kind of an offshoot of what you said is think about that sort of that very hair metal, heavy metal from the 80s.
oh yeah,
It was
yeah.
very costume driven, very much these sort of like that maybe that came from Kiss, who kind of created these icons visually and went on
Well,
stage.
even Elvis.
Oh
Elvis
yeah,
was big fan of Captain Marvel
Captain Marvel.
Jr.
Yeah,
He tried to be with the costumes he wore. He tried to be Captain Marvel Jr. and the hair,
yeah.
uh, yeah. Uh, it does affect other areas, and other areas affect it. But my I love superheroes, but the stuff that I really was impressed by was the EC things.
Mm,
Real people, more or less real people, faced sometimes with fantastic things happening to them. But still, there was a basic reality there, done in 6 or 7 or 8
hmm.
pages. Uh, that to me was amazing. The spirit stories, especially, one of my favorites is, the last 10 minutes in a man's life.
Mm,
Spirit pops in at the very end of the thing, but otherwise it's about this guy and living, surrounded in Brooklyn, I guess it was, and he's unhappy with his life. He's never done anything wrong in his life, but he winds up killing a guy and getting killed at the end, and that line of the fellow whose girlfriend has been waiting for him to show up, and you're 10 minutes late, and he says, "Ah, what's 10 minutes in a man's life?"
mm. Yeah.
this guy in 10 minutes has gone from this basically nice guy to a killer, uh, brilliant, wonderful storytelling there, there wasn't an ounce of fat in the telling of
Mhm.
it. Every panel deserved to be there, and Toth in that car, that 1937 Cord,
Mhm.
gee, uh, there's brilliance in comics, and it's in all, eras.
Yeah.
I hear some people say, "Oh, they aren't what they used to be," but, uh,
They're great
uh,
now. They're great now. Comic books are I mean, we have the amazing benefit at this currently that technology is able to have raised the level of production in comic books to something that you look at them and what would have been a beautiful comic book 30 years ago is considered a poor version of a comic book today on the production side.
uh-huh,
It's unbelievable. You know, me crying a little bit, and to you especially, that I remember talking to somebody a few years ago on the show, and we came to this realization that they'd never had somebody actually write letters on their page. Like all their artwork had been done entirely, and then the letters are done,
yeah.
in Illustrator, and that those files are combined. And I was like, oh, like, and I thought about my collection of my artwork over the years that I have in my files. I'm like, oh yeah, like, I know the jobs I was late on because there's pay stubs. You know, if I was on time, there's lettering on the art on the board. So it was it's I don't know. It's to me, there's a bit of the loss of the art. It's choices are made for production when it comes to comics. You were talking about Mobius wondering why artists don't letter their own things. Well, it's a time issue. It has nothing to do with desire. It is really purely systematically based on time. And because the tools that we have are so much quicker now for certain things, people are we're making choices. But like film cameras, I think that we are going to see art-based comics that exist, which will be done on paper, all of the parts being done on paper, as much as possible to create objects, the artwork being an object, and then the final piece being an object. So I have this idea that the product side is one thing, and that's the mass market of comic books. But then the smaller side of it could be this art piece of comic books being done with a craftsman's hand.
Well, the stuff that I do, uh, as far as lettering, I'm down to, lettering on the boards pretty much only for Walt Simonson.
Hmm.
Other people have requested that, and, I never would have believed this years ago, but I actually prefer, the computer.
Hmm.
I letter by hand, when I can into the computer, or I'll use a typeface that has the look of hand lettering about it with 2 separate versions of each
Hmm.
letter, and even then, I go in and play with the stuff, but, for the regular lettering, I use, Photoshop, uh, to do the lettering. At one time, there was a feeling that you had to use Illustrator because you could blow it up as big as a building, but under what circumstances would it ever be blown up as big as a building? And even if you did, you could still use uh, Photoshop. If you get right up to it, you'd see all the dot patterns
Hmm.
or the step ladder effect or whatever. But if you're going to be back looking up at a building, you're going to see it fine. But I I love the placement of the lettering. The I kind of get through the actual lettering and all, and the creation of the balloons and the sound effects. That's fun. I enjoy doing that on the computer. I like drawing on the computer too. Um, Partially because so many of the tools, the brushes, certainly the ink, the pens, they aren't what they used to be.
No,
Uh,
they're not.
yeah. But I actually like working on the computer. But the one great thing is I try to incorporate the lettering so it doesn't look like it's just laid on top.
Mm-hmm.
I like to have some lettering go maybe behind some element that's in the panel. It could be a person's head, it could be some piece of machinery or something, but it gives it a depth. And then the thing that I've been known for years is uh, breaking the border,
Yep.
having the balloon become the border, the lettering all the way up to where the top of the border would have been. And I stole that from Al Williamson and Carmine and various other people who used it at times because it gives a plus to the panel,
Mm-hmm.
to the look of it. It's not just a square or a rectangle. It suddenly takes on some neat shape, and I like that. But having the lettering exist on different planes, it to me it really adds to the reading of the
Mm-hmm.
thing. Sometimes I'll have a balloon half in one panel, half in another, and it's because there's some lettering off to the left, and you're going to that, and you're moving into the other panel
Yeah.
at the same time. There are so many things you can do, even psychological things. I've mentioned before that these days, whenever I do anything involving Batman, Batman's lettering and balloons are always a little larger and a little thicker than anybody else's on the page. And partly it was Christian Bale with his Batman voice there. I tried to do something like that. It's very subtle, and I'm not sure a lot of people even notice. But
They're going to be thumbing through their copies now.
yep.
Well, so at the risk of inflating your ego here, but you were the first letterer I recall sort of singling out the concept of a letterer standing out on the page. And it's not to say that other ones hadn't, as you cited Al Williamson and others doing certain things in type, and you're like, hey, I think I can kind of do something like that as well. It's like there is no first of anything, like, so it's like, oh, George Harrison was the first guitar player to pick a solo, and it's like, well, maybe for a certain type of album that's sold over a certain number of sales, but like blues
Mhm.
players have been doing picking guitar solos for a long time, and they got that from people playing, clawhammer banjo, so you have these periods. But I was a devotee of Thor on the run that you and Walter did, and it was in that I saw all this lettering work that didn't look or feel like anything else. And it was part of the artwork. It was, like you said, weaving around with
Mhm.
elements and breaking the sort of the fourth wall of comic books by going outside of the panels. And, while Walter's artwork wasn't doing that, your lettering was. And I thought that was like, it stood out. I was like, wow, what is this? So then, like, so you sort of put your stamp in my stupid head for that type of possibility when it came to what you can do with a form, like other artists had done with various elements of different artwork over the years for me. So there you go.
Well, I was so lucky to kind of team up with Walt on all these things we've done over the years. He and I think alike as far as design, and he's a really good letterer. But he was the one who enabled me to do that stuff. I'd done things like that prior, but not on that level.
Mm-hmm.
And uh, uh, it's just a pleasure to work on anything that Walt does. He and Tommy Lee Edwards, Jean Paul Leon, there are other people, Joe Kubert. Uh, Throughout their working lives, they've just gotten better and better and better. I don't know how they do it. So many artists, they reach a plateau and they stay there or they start going downward.
Yep.
And that's not true of any of them. That Joe Kubert was growing
Mm-hmm.
up to the day he
Oh,
died.
yeah, yeah.
And John Paul
John Paul was working up till the end. I mean, he was
yeah,
the I don't there's no, like, I knew him since he was 19. He went to school with me, and I didn't know anyone with a harder work ethic in the business than he did. Like that guy just all the time, drawing all the time. And but like you said, Tommy Lee's work, yeah, I look at him like, man, how is he even doing this? Like it's just crazy. uh, and I think of artists like Dan Pan-Ocean or Adam Hughes, that these guys, they're getting better. They're getting, and I don't,
Mhm.
and that wasn't always the case when it comes to,
Yeah.
and I don't, and I've, because styles change, styles change of periods, especially when both of the majors had their house styles, so if you weren't
Mhm.
drawing the house style of what we like now, you're out with the bathwater unless you can change. And I think that period has kind of waned in so much of a fashion, and now maybe individuality, like what people do on the page, is sort of taken at a higher level to the editorial staff. So I don't know what the cause is, but I definitely see artists who are in their 50s, maybe early 60s, and they are doing artwork that is better than they did 30, 40 years ago. It's crazy.
In addition to some contemporary stuff, I've got to admit that I'm not keeping up with all
That's
that I
okay.
should.
You shouldn't have to.
I just I'd heard of Jess Smith and Bone for years, for instance. I just recently went out and bought that big 1,300
The
page
door
Bone book.
stopper. Yeah,
Uh, it's brilliant.
it is.
The pacing is more relaxed than I'm used to, but it works.
Mhm.
And the humor, I've been on the floor laughing sometimes. It's so well done. Uh, but I've also gone back 90 years or so. I read the Popeye stuff from before Popeye even came into the Thimble Theater strip from 1928 to 1938 when Seagar had to hand it over to other people. And it's wonderful. And Milton Caniff,
Mm.
Ontario Pirates,
Yeah.
he was a
Yes.
genius. That he took this simple kids strip, or kids adventure sort of thing, and by the time World War II rolled around, these were people
Hmm.
in there that you could really identify with and that you cared about, and the writing, everything was so good. Prince Valiant, I was surprised. I read all the Prince Valiants from 19, was it 37 up to uh, 71, 72, thereabouts. Uh, the writing wasn't as good overall as I had hoped, but it was still very, very good. And I was surprised that that Foster would set up a a form of government. A Val would come in and get rid of the dictator, and locally they'd had this form of government, and then sometimes he'd come back a year later and see what happened.
Hmm.
Interesting. He was playing with the ways of democracy and other forms of government and how they turn out yeah, I like that. There's Well, there's wonderful, wonderful stuff, and there's terrible, awful stuff in
Sure.
but nowadays there is more of a, well, I don't know. If you look at the very early comic strips, they're all over the
Well,
place.
no, I know exactly what you're saying here. We have
Mhm.
this incredible breadth right now, but it's like, but it's this bell shape, or I guess I don't know. Right now we have that, but for like the huge chunk of time in the middle, it really narrowed down. And because the market, either because of legal constraints, and sort of the market response, we just had sort of two majors, and they were people in tights having fights. That was the body of
Mhm.
comics for a long time. But then you go back, and then before the problems in the 50s, boy, man, there was just anything was happening in comic books, or comics in general. I guess I should open that up a little wider. But yeah, so I kind of feel it's a cool time now. that we're kind of getting to experience, that the market is supporting people who are saying, hey, I've got this idea for, Westerns. There's people doing Westerns.
Uh-huh.
I mean, how cool is it? There wasn't a Western being done in the 80s and the 90s. Just wasn't a thing.
It's it, this is a personal uh, nit to pick, I guess, of mine. There was a book called Batlash back in the
Sure.
68, I guess. So there was a one issue showcase thing, and then 7 issues, I think, of the regular book. That was some of the most brilliant stuff I've ever seen in comics form. Nick Cardy drew it. Denny O'Neil, Joe Orlando, Sergio Aragones, they were all in on the writing of it. It it was humor with an undertone of tragedy. And the final issue, they flipped it around. It was tragedy with an undertone of humor. It is so good. And I was looking the other day through this book of DC through the years. And I thought, oh, I wonder what they had to say about Batlash. So I turned to 1968, 1969, and there's no mention of Batlash. I went and looked in the index, no mention of Batlash. There's a couple of books. There's one book that does mention him, but the other one, I think Tony Isabella did it. 1,000 comics you should read before you die, I
Okay.
think was the name of it, or something similar to that. No mention of Batlash. I even took Tony to task about that. But Joe Orlando told me that it was a Western. Westerns were dead at that time, so the book died after issue 7. But he told me that the sales to foreign publishers were so good that they could have lost money in the United States and still kept that book going
Hmm.
because they would have made a profit overall from the sales to different publishers in Europe and South America, where Westerns weren't dead.
Yeah.
But beyond being a Western, it was a brilliant comic book. The characterizations were so good, the humor was amazing, and that undertone of tragedy going through all those issues. Uh,
There's, I think there are so many examples of that in so many different mediums where you have something that breaks the mold, but it uses the stereotype. Like, so, hey, I'm going to do
Mm.
I'm going to do a Western, I'm going to do a whatever, but you're breaking the conventions within this thing. But on the outside, it looks like what you expect it to look like. But when you get closer and experience it, you go, oh, this is an entirely different thing. And I love this. But if people who, we all judge everything on by the cover, we look at it and go, well, I'm not really into that, and they don't buy it, so it doesn't get a chance. And that's
Mhm.
tough. I mean, that's why so many people, you see people and evangelizing the things they love. Like, you are out there and you're screaming like, you got to read this, you got to see this, listen to this, whatever. um because you want other people to experience what you're experiencing.
Mhm. Well, in 1969, I was at the Suling Convention, first time I'd ever come to New York, and, I went up to Marvel, all sorts of various things happened, but at the convention, I was talking to some kid, and I'd never run across this before with the comic collecting friends that I had out in Washington. He only read, Marvels. He wouldn't even look at a DC, even though somebody who wrote and drew for Marvel might be working,
Sure.
for DC. And I went out and bought him a copy of Batlash. Went out on the street somewhere to some news dealer and grabbed a copy of Batlash. Spent 12 cents on it and gave it to him. Read this. I never knew what happened. I hope he read it and actually
Oh
enjoyed it
yeah.
and decided to maybe think about buying something that wasn't just from Marvel. I mean, as I said, I'd done that same sort of thing when I was much younger,
Hmm.
starting with Disney, and then that circle going outward all the time, and then finally, and not well later on, encapsulating undergrounds and things like
Hmm.
that, the stuff from other countries, and other time periods. You could make a good, solid argument that right now is the real golden age of comics.
Yeah.
Because not only are there wonderful things being done new now, but all this stuff from the past
Hmm.
is so much more easily
Yeah,
available.
you haven't missed anything. That's the thing. Like, it's all there. Like, if anybody screams and yells like, oh, I missed this, or oh, they changed it so it's all ruined. I'm like, it's not ruined. It's all there. You can find it. It's all great.
Mhm.
Like, we're all standing on these shoulders of of giants, and whether we as people who enjoy something or we as people who make something, like we're all the beneficiaries of past brilliance. And so you're talking about the circles, and somebody who is really, really key in expanding my circles was Bob Stewart.
Oh, he was great.
Yes. Bob Stewart. I took a class with Bob Stewart for one semester, and boy, did I just learn everything. That guy, boy, I don't know anyone who knew more and loved more about the medium than that guy. He was one of a kind in that respect.
Well, here in the studio where I am, there was a short period of time where Bob Stewart and I shared the studio.
Hmm.
He would come out and work here. He took over for me at DC when I was up there in the 80s, 88 and 89. I realized that I was almost redundant. Uh, uh, and also, I was killing myself. I was getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning, going into New York. Took 2 hours where it used to take 1 hour at when I was in heavy metal. And then I would work there until 7 or 8, and come back and work until 1, and then get up and
Mm.
grab a shower and head on out again. So I loved it up there. The people were wonderful, and Joe and Archie and Paul Levitz and Bob LaRose, all the guys in the production department. But I finally just had to call it a day. But I suggested Bob to help out Joe Orlando, and of course Joe knew Bob.
Hmm.
They knew each other for decades probably by that time. Um, but uh, Bob was wonderful. He wrote for heavy metal. He was chosen by Ted White, and it was a good choice to write some of the articles for the dossier section. And he wrote one that was just brilliant. Bob, in what he wrote, uh, there were no tethers there. He would go from one thing into another, into another, into another. It was like the Russian dolls
Hmm.
sort of thing. I loved it. A lot of people didn't. They thought he should have stuck to one subject, but he kind of stuck to one subject once. It was an article about a fellow who had done an illustration that Bob really liked, and then he saw the guy's name on Pinocchio, and he went in. It was like solving a mystery, uh, and he finally actually contacted the artist
Okay.
and found out that he had worked for Disney for a while, and yes, he had done this illustration that Bob had come across, and just a great article. And I remember pushing Bob as one of our regulars at Heavy Metal, and after the success of the theatrical movie, we were talking about the second movie,
Hmm.
and there were a bunch of us there, the Lynn Mogul and Julie and Bob and Lou Stathis, I think, and me, and maybe a couple of others at times. But Bob had come across an unproduced screenplay, and the author's name is escaping me. He won the Pulitzer Prize. He wrote The African Queen. Um,
Oh.
I think he wrote Night of the Hunter. Really, really amazing writer. And Bob brought in this unproduced screenplay by him, and
Hmm.
we were all excited. We thought, wow, this long dead writer to have his stuff pop up in animation as the second heavy metal movie.
Hmm.
And we read it, and it was not great.
Oh.
Let's put it that way. It was as if some first year film student had just thrown together a batch of ideas off the top of his head. There was no there to there to there
Hmm.
progression in any way. It was sad, but I was glad to see to see it and read it.
Yeah.
And Bob brought it into as a possibility there.
Yeah, he was. I'm so glad that I was able to spend time with him and learn from him, and I guess open up my mind that much wider because of him.
Well, I got to know him when I was still out in Washington. I wrote to Castle of Frankenstein, which I thought was a wonderful magazine. And at least for the first, I don't know, 20 issues or something like that, they covered comics too, in addition to movies. And gosh, Len Wein and Bernie Wrightson and Marv Wolfman and all kinds of other people were in there. And Bob somehow got me and T. Casey Brennan together. And I drew a story that Brennan had written, and I'd known his work from the Warren books. And I I got $2 a page for penciling, inking, and lettering this story. 25 cents an hour, roughly.
Hey, that's great rates at 1993. Yeah.
Well, this was 1973. I think it was 72,
Wow.
71, somewhere around there. Um, and I did some other things with Bob. We did a story called Greenie that was finally published in Wild Things, this compilation book that I did. Uh, I drew the thing up and started writing it, and then Bob kind of took over on the writing, and it was great fun to do. It was among the first things I did where I thought I had reached something of a professional level artist. Um, but it was enjoyable. I remember he sent me some stuff by another artist that I could letter, so it was the first lettering I did for somebody other than me. And I remember the paper was really it ate the ink, and but I persevered through it. And when I got back here, of course, I met Bob face to face, and yeah, we. I remember he one of the first letters or the initial letters that he sent to me. He had some sort of theory about comics, and he wanted to know what I thought of it. And it was beyond me. It was so far, way out there. And he knew so much about comics.
Mm-hmm.
His knowledge. Ted White was like that too. Ted and I went to a party one time that was pretty boring, and we were out on this patio talking comics, and we started talking about the early days of Superman. And I quoted a lot of things to him that I had learned from reading about those days. And I got home that night and I thought, I wonder if I was right about some of the things I told Bob. And I grabbed my copy of All in Color for a Dime, where I'd taken a lot of this information, opened it up, and found out that all the information I'd given to Ted, I meant Ted White, uh, was was written by Ted White in All in Color for a Dime.
You're quoting the lyrics back to the
Yeah,
songwriter.
yeah.
Ah, that's the best. That is the best.
I don't think I mentioned that to Ted afterwards. I was too afraid to,
Sure.
to hear his reaction.
Sure. I mean, either his reaction was like, yeah, that's totally right, or I'm just gonna let him have this one. Oh, that's hilarious. And I would feel remiss if I don't mention this as well, as I've really so loved the confluence of everybody's work on Cosmic Odyssey. Like there's like I mean, listen, there's nobody drawing comic books who has affected comic books more in the last 30 years than Mike Mignola. Like what Mike's done on the page has, done so much to change the way people draw, like Kirby did back, 50 years ago. But there's this sort of period that I kind of feel Cosmic Odyssey was kind of the moment when Mike was starting to get a handle on where he wanted to take what he was doing. And then he had a few larger projects that he did before he hit Hellboy. But I think, to me, Cosmic Odyssey is when he I don't know, you got the right fuel in the tank or whatever it was, but everybody's work on that one book series was just unbelievable. So, how did you get involved with that one?
I can't really remember. It must have been the editor's
Yeah.
choice. I'm not sure, but it was great fun. And I was looking at it recently. I generally don't like things that I've done, whether it's drawing or writing or lettering. And I looked through that. Time has passed so that it's almost as if someone else did it, and I could look at it and say, "Oh, that's pretty good," or but the pretty goods outweighed anything else on
Hmm.
that one. I was really happy with what I saw, and it went with the artwork. I thought he is a master of shapes,
Yeah.
as Alex Toth. Yeah, I've always loved his work and to be able to work on the pencils. I remember I did one issue of that out in Washington. Kathy and I were on vacation, and I was sitting at her parents' dining room table, lettering away on Cosmic Odyssey out there. Um, yeah, I really loved working on that. And there's a bit of a Walt in his stuff, or maybe the other way around. I'm not sure. Uh, John Paul, all these people, they all understood shapes,
Yeah.
and I mean, you can take a shape. What I do lots of times is feather it, just to give it some more form. They could do it with just lines, and I never understood how they managed to do that. But it's all amazing.
Yeah. It's this reductionist kind of approach to artwork where you are breaking shapes down to the barest amount of
Mhm.
information, but playing them off one another to be able to tell the most. And that's, at first pass, you go, well, that's really easy. If you're naive and you look at it, well, look at that's so simple. It's just a bunch of shapes. But to everybody else who has held a pen or a pencil in their hand and tried to do it, you go, oh, okay, those are important shapes.
Well, I could add Mobius to that
Yeah,
group
no, no,
too.
I didn't want to blurt it out, but yeah, no, Mobius is definitely in that category.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, there's a form, and something you were talking about Mobius's lettering, and I'm thinking about your lettering, thinking about you, Walt, working with Walter or working with Mike, and how and you will have to lend a voice to the language that's being communicated in the letters. So your letter forms that you're choosing and how you're applying the pressure, though all those shapes accumulate to creating the voice, which is really unique. In terms of visual communication. So, like you were talking about weighting Batman's balloons a little more, and like
Mhm.
all that stuff is they're subtle efforts and gestures that tell much more than maybe our conscious brains are picking up on.
Yeah, I try to toss in those things. Sometimes they're so obscure that even seeing them later on, I've forgotten about them
Hmm.
and I don't notice them. But I try to do things like that. Well, some that's more obvious is nobody talks over Batman. Uh, he will talk over other people. His balloon might go over another person's balloon, but nothing, no, never the other way around. Even if he's in the foreground, the other characters' balloons are behind him.
Hmm.
Uh, I don't know how many people actually notice that, but
Like I said, they'll be thumbing through their copies now, going like, "Oh, look at that!" Yeah. So, okay, even though technically you did letter over Mobius, even though it wasn't an original from scratch on pencil project,
mhm.
so let's put him aside. If there was one artist you, it doesn't matter, living, dead, whatever, could letter over, who would it be?
Wow. I can't think of anyone that I haven't in one way or another lettered over, even Eisner.
Uh-huh.
Uh, we did a spirit story in heavy metal along with an interview with Eisner. And the materials that were sent to us, the lettering was such a mess. They were running together. It was a copy of a copy of a copy of a
Mhm.
copy. I relettered the entire thing, trying to be as true to the original stuff as I could, and failing miserably. But still, I don't know how many people noticed that. But anyway, I felt I couldn't just let it go as it was. So
Right.
I can actually say I've lettered Eisner. And MÖBIUS and so many other people. There is one guy that I did letter. Uh, well, he lettered it. Let's put it that way. I've told this story before, but there was a book years ago. Oh, now I'm forgetting names again here. Uh, Slumberland, Little
Little
Nemo in
Nemo. Yeah, yeah.
Slumberland,
Windsor McKay.
Windsor McKay. I always loved Windsor McKay's artwork, and I thought his balloons were terrible. They were there was no air to them. They were oddly designed,
Mhm.
and the lettering was too close in some cases. But somebody called me up, whoever the editor was on that book, and he said, "Would you like to letter one of these new Little Nemos?" And I said, "Sure." And he sent me a scan of the artwork, and I went over to where my Nemo stuff was at that time and pulled out some stuff and looked at it and found a page with some neat lettering on it and that had practically every letter of the alphabet in it. And I scanned that in. And then I moved the letters around one at a time in order to letter that page. But it was not my lettering; it was his.
Right.
But I took some of his balloons and played with them and gave them some air and didn't encroach on the artwork, but still gave them some air there. And so I thought it looked a lot better. But it was the two of us,
Mhm.
doing that lettering, even though he had been gone for a decade. I thought there was a certain humor to it.
Yeah.
Uh, but it was fun to letter it and to use his letters.
That's a great pick. I mean, his name hopped in my head 2 times already in our conversation just because it kind of always goes back to Windsor McKay at some point, and that's, it's like you're saying you weren't doing that or you were using his, but it's like, I mean, a graphic designer doesn't go, "Well, I didn't design Helvetica, I just used it." Like, I mean, you're using I mean, it's like it would be like doing an Alex Toe thing. Like, you would probably look for the best examples of Alex's lettering to
Mhm.
recreate something if you were doing that rather than trying to copy Alex's lettering.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. That's a fair I'm gonna give you that answer. That's a gold star answer. I'm cool with that one. Well, John, I think I've taken up plenty of your time. Although I think we could probably go on and on about a few other things, but this has been an absolute blast talking with you. I am just so happy that we got to get together and do this and virtually. And even though you're a joy to talk to, if anybody is at a show and John is on the list of guests, stop by his booth, spend time with John because you have a million stories because you've seen it all and you've done it all and you've known them all. So it's not a bad place to be.
Well, sometimes the people bringing up a comic for me to sign is an impetus for a story
Hmm.
because a book I haven't looked at in years, and I can tell them some things about what was going on when I was working on it. It almost always brings up some memory.
That's great. I might be the antithesis of that. Have forgotten most everything that I've ever done. I have friends who will say, "Oh, remember when you did this?" I'm like, "Not a clue. Don't remember it." So, um,
Well, back in the '60s, when I first encountered fanzines, there would be these interviews with different artists and writers, and they'd be talking. The interviewer would ask about some then classic piece of work that they had done, And 9 times out of 10, the artist or writer had no memory at all of what he was doing or how that came about or the story itself. And I couldn't understand that.
Mm.
How could you do something like, oh, gee, the spirit stuff or some of those EC stories and not, how
Right.
could they all just get slammed together as one thing that went on and on? But now I know every now and then someone will bring me a comic that goes back, and I have to wonder, did I actually do this? And sometimes Kathy, my wife, is better at uh, noticing my style, than I am.
Yeah.
And this, I'm sure you've encountered this too. I'll look back on something I did years ago, and I'll think, "Wow, I've lost that.
Mm.
Why don't I do that anymore?" And I'll kind of try to bring back something that I was working on or something that I was doing at that time.
I've definitely had that experience, and I've talked to many a former peer in the industry about those experiences, and we all have them. We all have them. It's an
Mhm.
interesting trait. Um, oh, one little side note here, because Walter's the only person you're really, you know, lettering on board with anymore. Do you like have a specific stock of supplies that you just keep to the side just for Walt?
Well, for years, I used a Castel TG,
Hmm.
technical pen, and they stopped making them about 20 years ago, maybe. And Todd Klein and I both went around grabbing every TG that we could. And I thought they would last me for the rest of my life, but some of them have pooped out already. The one that I use mostly, the number one for lettering, I'm down to maybe one of them.
Oh
Uh,
wow.
Now you can still find rapidographis around, and I've actually ordered a few of those. They aren't as good as the TGs were, but they're okay as a secondary way of getting things done. I've actually lettered a few things with contemporary markers. They're okay, but I've seen people do wondrous
Sure.
things with them, but I feel like I can't. Yeah, it doesn't have the same feel
Yeah.
uh, as the PG did.
There's something about the sensation of the tool in your hand against the paper
Yeah.
that if that feedback isn't there, it's real hard to calibrate what you're trying to do.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, on both the lettering and artwork that I do on the computer, I have to be deliberately sloppy in order to give it something of a human
Okay. Yeah.
feel.
Sure.
I years ago I did some fanzine stuff for this fellow. Well, it wasn't really a fanzine. He it was on the line of Wizard or something like that. But I worked with a technician. I sat at the computer with the guy and I told him what I wanted to do, and then he would print it out and we'd look at it, see how it actually looked on paper. And at one point, I had him do an oval for some reason, and he printed it out, and I looked at it and thought something's wrong with that. And I'd brought along my ovals and pens, and I made a same size oval right next to the one that he had done, and it looked better somehow. And I thought, why? What's going on here? Then I realized the oval he did was perfect,
Right.
and it was also perfectly bland and boring. It didn't have any of that slight thickness, thinness that mine had for going for it, and so I've tried to be as human as possible, even though I'm using some very technical things here lately.
Nice. So that's the lesson of the day. Try to be messy, be more human.
Yeah.
Thanks, John. This is great.
Thank you. It's been a great opportunity. We'll see you.
Right? I mean, what can I say? Isn't John the greatest? Not only is he blessed with creative chops, his drive and fearlessness got him into the rooms during the moments that shifted the industry. It's mind blowing. While there are plenty of talented people in the comics industry, my mind marvels at John's encyclopedic memory. How he remembers all of this, I have no idea. Trivial Pursuit was a game that my sponge of a brain did pretty well with, but I suspect John would be unbeatable. Listening to the recording as I edited, two things stood out. One, hearing how hard I worked to keep up with him during the conversation. Two, how valuable these anecdotes, observations, and memories were. This season, it's been a goal of mine to keep these episodes tight, but when I began the edit, I messaged a friend for some advice. I wrote, "Instinct is yelling in my head that John's a legend, and I shouldn't cut his super interesting stories down." My wise friend responded, "Keep them all. It's history." And what an amazing history. John has a million of these stories. So go find him at Heroes or at Baltimore Comic Con. I'm sure he will regale you with tales that you couldn't imagine. Oh, and if you happen to own a Castell TG Tech pen, how about you deliver it to the man himself? And let's keep him busy lettering Walter's comics in a proper fashion. Next week is a triple header episode with Sandra Hope, Dexter Vines, and Carl Story talking about the role of inkers in modern comics. Make sure to check it out. Thanks for listening.